John, this is one of the big characters on the international stage. Can you share with us how things are going on the ground after the first 100 days?
Well, it's one of the most extraordinary economic experiments I think anyone has seen. I've been coming to Argentina since the 1980s. I interviewed Carlos Menem, who also has rather magnificent sideburns back here then. He tried to bring down inflation. It ended up in riots and civil unrest and stuff like that. This man, Milei, is somebody who is a free market fundamentalist. He calls his dogs after people like Milton Friedman. He used to be an economics professor, and as you heard there, he hates profoundly the idea of central banks printing money. So his long-term aim, he still claims, is to dollarize the economy, close down the central bank, and replace the dollar with the peso, replace the peso with the dollar. The truth and what's happening in between, and he's somewhat discursive in his answers, I think would be a way of putting it. Behind that, it looks like he's having to compromise a little bit for two reasons. Firstly, he hasn't got much support in Congress. He himself is popular, but he doesn't have many people from his party in Congress. And secondly, because I think there is a limit to how much pain Argentines can take. The inflation rate here is, he's reduced it to 13% a month. It's still unbelievably high, and people's savings, people's money is disappearing regularly.
John, what do you notice is the difference between the man on the campaign trail, the big plans he had, and what he's been able to execute so far in the first few months?
Well, he's kind of calmed down a bit. on the campaign trail, he called China an assassin. When I asked him about China in this interview, he sidestepped that a bit and said they had to get on with people. I think Lula and the Pope, he both called them communists. He calls the people who run the Congress, he talks about the caste. He runs very much on a somewhat kind of Trumpian, I'm against the establishment way of looking at things. But the fact is he has to get some kind of deal through Congress. He has sent in an enormous series of reforms which Congress shoved back at him. Now he's trying to go through to the governors, but to give you some idea of how much he's thinking of taking out, at the moment the Argentine state is around 37% of GDP. The current set of reforms he's sent to the governors are reducing them to 22%. This is kind of Thatcherism on steroids. It's much bigger, much more dramatic, and the only thing he's got going for him, I think, is the fact that Argentines have had 100 years of false dawns, false promises, all those things. This used to be, I think, the fourth richest country in the world just over 100 years ago, and it has gradually gone down. He is promising kind of honesty and truth, but that's very, very difficult if you've just seen your pension reduced by 30% in a year. It's a very tough series of proposals he's trying to push through.
John, you mentioned China. How is he grappling with the reality of dealing with China as opposed to the plans he had?
Well, in theory, he's very against China because he hates socialism and he called them assassins. But, the basic fact is he has an $18 billion swap line with China, and he has virtually no other reserves. So that, I think, exercises some degree of caution on him. There's a kind of row here at the moment to do with the space station, which the Chinese are building down in Patagonia, which sadly I didn't get to visit. But they're building it there, and the US is saying, look, this is a military purpose. And there's that was sort of an opportunity for Milei to say, no, I'm going to close it down for you. It's sort of obvious at the moment that he's unlikely to do that. And so he's having to deal with it. We've got a long, big take about this today. You have this man who's come in really advocating exactly the obvious opposite of everything that China is. But he is having to make compromises. And one rather weird part of it is actually the Chinese are no longer investing quite so much in Latin America as they did. But Argentina is unusually on the hook to them. So they have dramatic degrees of leverage here.